What's up, my people? Welcome to Fellowship Bible Church's Sermon Spotlight, where we're coming at you.
Do you feel funny saying that with Caleb
each
here on
and
your
every
left?
week?
Rose, you're not even going to let him get through the
Absolutely.
intro.
No, the script writer
She
is
jumped
here
right in.
with
I
a
couldn't
fresh
help but interrupt.
service to debrief
You're doing great.
in effort to send biblical truth.
Uh-huh.
Yeah, no, I like looking
The three
at him when I
amigos
say
here
it.
today.
What better way to do that than by what?
Power of conversation. The power of
Yes.
Yeah.
jumping in.
I'm Mark Francis.
Excited to be here.
It's like the triple host seat, but then also the triple commentator seats.
Mark Carey's
So,
busy. You know what I mean? The Lord's using him in mighty ways.
It happens.
More important than this podcast, so we honor that.
Yeah.
And then we get the backups in here. So great to be here.
Well, that's Caleb Pearson. You've heard him, and you've also heard Rose Locke.
Yeah, I haven't been here for a long time.
It's been a lot going on.
It's been busy
A lot going
for
on
me
in
too.
your life, our lives. Yes, sorry for your loss, and we can just continue to grieve, but also rejoice with
Celebrate.
you.
Yeah,
and
absolutely.
Your mother's passing. So, yes, thank you for being here. And yeah, Mark Carey's not here, and yeah, he does have lots of things going on. Which, by the way, let me give a quick plug because this Friday, the Fellowship Family podcast is going to release an episode where we talk about just recapping that Fellowship Family meeting that happened last Sunday. Specifically transitions, and Mark Carey is a big part of that. He will not be on the episode, but you'll have 3 elders on there. So they will give their take on what happened at that meeting and those transitions.
And
So,
I think they're getting additional questions as well that they'll address on
Yeah.
that podcast. So,
So-
it'll be potentially more helpful, specific stuff too.
fire away, elders at fbcva.org, and you've got it. So we're here in Mark chapter 1 still. I don't even know what week this is, but we're going 1 week at a time, just plodding through Scripture, which is great. So Rose will come your way and just give us your recap of the weekend from your standpoint.
From the sermon itself, this passage has always been really meaningful to me because several years ago, for some reason, I was doing a personal study on the word compassion. And this is one of those places where it talks about that Jesus was moved with compassion. And I think that's such a really powerful word. In fact, the worship planning team read through the book of Mark. And the person who was reading out loud this chapter was reading from one version. I believe it was the NIV open at the same time. And the NIV uses a word that was a word that would have a negative connotation in our world. So I actually went back to Blue Letter and spent some time on this specific word in this passage. And what Mark Carey was expressing is what I learned, and that is that this word about compassion is like physical discomfort in the bowels. Like it's literally like feeling something deep within your soul. And I think that this idea that Jesus had compassion on this man is something that we can really use when we're thinking about how to follow Jesus in our lives.
Because the context of that is, he sees the leper who then falls on his knees before Jesus. So he sees him, which we saw some of the disfigured pictures that Mark put out there of just the discomfort of even seeing a leper. But then the idea that the leper is approaching Jesus, falling on his knees, just begging, if you are willing to make me clean. I can see how, man, that would just move anyone, you would think. But to Jesus, then his response is compassion and touch.
Right. And the duality just in the world that we live in, where everybody's trying so hard to be seen, right? And the generation behind me, my kids, the social media, the Instagram, the how many followers do you have? Am I seen? Am I seen? Is the world seeing me? And then the idea that this leper, Mark, at one point in his sermon, Mark talks about that the man, when he looked at his own body, looking at his own body would have brought him confronted with a sense of sin, because the Jews had that tight relationship with this disease and sin. So here's a man who's looking at himself and feeling completely unworthy, and no one is seeing him, and our Lord had compassion on him. And frankly, guys, that's the kind of person that I want to be. I want to be the kind of person that has compassion on people that maybe the rest of the world doesn't see. To me, that's really following Jesus. So I just think this passage has a lot of application for us.
Well, and I think that compassion piece helps tie into Jesus' humanity as well. It's not just that he's deity, capable of these things. He's not just some mindless spiritual form of God that's just fixing people. His heart beats for these people. He feels it, and he's responding to what's in front of him. I appreciate two things Pastor Mark did. One is use the pictures to raise the value of, okay, this was the real deal. Mm-hmm. And then the second thing is to share the cultural context and the historical context of the law and leprosy and how Jesus is fitting into all that, but demonstrating, Rose, you're pointing out that compassion, that we'll see more of Jesus' humanity built into this narrative, which is really twofold: mighty Messiah, suffering servant.
And that spiritual context, what you're alluding to, Rose, of just the sin component that people associated with just essentially diseases like that, or when things go wrong in your life. And that translates to people today even. I mean, there's plenty of people. I was even raised in a home where there was that kind of context of, okay, what's going on in your life because you, I don't know, sprained your ankle or something like that. And and so there's this tension of the spiritual with the physical that, yeah, you can make arguments in case, okay, yeah, God's going to allow things to happen in your life for certain reasons and causes that you've done and sin that you've had, or maybe other people have sinned against you. But that's not the context here. Mark was laying out this case that, yeah, just people just had this natural bent to just discard all these lepers and just declare them to be sinners, which then elevates the Pharisees because they're like, oh, look at us,
right,
mightier than everybody else because we're the sin-free people, you know?
It does return to the age-old question of, like, so Jesus Christ in his human form is physically moved when he sees this person, is moved with compassion and love for him. So it brings up that age-old question, why does God allow this kind of suffering? But, sometimes the first few sentences that Mark says in his sentence, sometimes it's easy to let those slide past us a little bit, but sometimes they're so key important we can't. So the first sentence out of Mark Carey's mouth was really, where is God and why doesn't he end it? Like, Mark literally asked us that question. And then he said, God allows it for his good pleasure to work his good plans. And so then it goes back to us trusting in that when we are walking through those really, really hard things, like a disease or like cancer, like the child family we saw, how...
what a great story.
Yeah.
Too.
And my son and Luke were very, very, very good friends. And so we've been walking through that with that family. And, it breaks your heart to see it, but to see the way that God is being glorified in the process as those hard things are happening to that family is really a pleasure in one sense to watch, even though we are moved with compassion for them at the same time.
And it's a wrestle with the temporal versus the eternal. That's going to be continually on Jesus' agenda and not in the same way it's on the crowd's agenda, right? At the end of Mark chapter 1, it gets to a point where he can no longer publicly enter a city because of what he's capable of doing. The bigger the miracles and the more physical you can see and experience the change, the more his credibility in their eyes is going to outweigh his actual message. And so Jesus is in this unique situation where his miracles are meant for a message. And so he's going to continue to fight against that as his credibility rises in their eyes. But this was one of those key moments where it's a physical deliverance, and Jesus is in the business of spiritual deliverance as well.
And Mark brought out the shame component of what a leper would be feeling, and really, I think, did a great job of allowing us to visualize and put ourselves in the shoes of somebody in that time period, in that era, and unpacking the idea of shame, but then spinning it on its head and going to the 1 Corinthians passage that, God uses those things to shame the wise, and just how, like, God is like, okay, the human perspective of what you'd think is shame is completely different than God's perspective of what he views someone's heart to be, and not the outward appearances.
Yeah, I think that was really great for Mark to talk a lot about shame here, because I think, at least in my observation, in our culture today, shame is one of these very popular kind of words, like in counseling kinds of circles and those sorts of places. And I think that the definition, and I printed it and meant to bring it in here. The book, Mark mentioned the book, the title of the book was Shame. I'm trying to remember the title of the book right now.
Yeah, I don't remember.
Can't remember now.
Yeah, I had printed the direct quote from the book that Mark mentioned, because the definition of shame that he read there, and the idea that shame is a feeling that we have, and it can be based on something we've done. It can be that shame can be based on something that was done to us, and we begin to feel less than human. The idea that shame could be shame is about not feeling good about yourself, or not feeling about that you're good enough. And then Mark just had this wonderful, like, his solution. He said basically his solution for shame is Christ. And he said, God views us as his children. So we are worthy because we are viewed as God's children. He adopts us. He calls us his own. He declares us righteous. So he does those things to us so that we don't have to sit in the shame any longer. Now, we do sin, and we do need to repent of those sins and ask for forgiveness. But once we've received that forgiveness, we don't have to sit in our shame, because we are worthy, because the King of Kings and Lord of Lords has compassion on us and loves us and cares for us. And man, I wish a lot of the people that I deal with in my life, I teach some at the university. I go into the public school system sometimes. The people that I meet and come in contact with, my heart bleeds for them to no longer feel the shame, but to know that our holy God has compassion on them.
And for believers especially, to know where our position is. It's positional truths, and not to get bogged down the way that the belief of the day was, that's a sin that's causing this and you should be shamed. That is not how God's heart rolls. Like, he's essentially, he cares about the heart, and he cares about us being his children in that moment, to where we shouldn't have the guilt or the shame that Mark was alluding to of the time, but instead to know that, we are a child of God, and we have that positional truth that, we've been adopted, and we have all the inheritances at our disposal, and all the things and all the blessings. And so there's a difference there of the sin outcome versus how we feel in the shame of what being a leper in this real instance, or just in our world today, just any other kind of thing that's going to cause guilt or shame in our own world would look like.
Yeah.
There was another note that I jotted down, and this was a personal note, but I think it's a call to all of us. And what I wrote was, shame is impacted by compassion. So Mark told the story of the doctor who started to use his orthopedic skills to restore some of the effects of the lepers, and how when he touched the leper, and the man began to cry because someone touched him. And so what I something that I personally gleaned from Mark's sermon this past week was that when I show compassion to those who maybe they're not the brightest, they're not the most beautiful in the world's eyes, they're not the most brightest, they don't have everything together, they don't have the perfect Pinterest, Instagram family, whatever that is. But when I show compassion to them, then in a sense, I am beginning to impact their shame. And so the showing of compassion by us is really important. And I told the guys before the podcast that I was able, 2 weeks ago, I was in town just for a couple days. And in those couple days I was here, I was able to go to the rescue mission fundraiser and just see the way that people's lives are being changed because the people at the rescue mission are showing them compassion and how they're beginning to recognize that they have value and that they can impact others. And just a beautiful example right in here in our own community. And the same thing, Tammy Perkins has started this great ministry here called Embrace Grace, where they've invited girls. We are not so far removed from the time when you got pregnant outside of wedlock, or had an unplanned pregnancy, and you were shut in the closet, or you were sent away, or you were pressured to have an abortion at this point in our lives. But Tammy has started this ministry, and she is loving some girls. And we're going to have the biggest party here for them. If you haven't seen the advertisements for that, I'm sure contact the church office, look on the website, you can find out more about Embrace Grace Ministry. But I think that when we do those things for the less fortunate, we are impacting them personally, and we are glorifying God in the process, because we are showing them that they can be loved and that they are loved.
And that's the beauty of studying something like this. We're only one chapter in. And we've already covered this many things. Obviously, it's going to crescendo and build, not just his deeds and actions, but his message and what Jesus ultimately does with it. But it's that age-old question, what would Jesus do? We take that and run with it and then come up with answers to that question. Oh, well, maybe Jesus would do this. If it was my aunt and my money and maybe he would do this. But you actually look at what he already did. It helps inform the answer to that question. He would show compassion. He would, interact with people before the opportunity for deliverance even came about, right? He was engaging and interacting with them, and ministry was on the forefront. When we are intersected in each other's lives, ministry is less hard because we're in it with them. We're actually interacting. And that is where I think the growth of a believing community, that's really the next level of it compared to this, I don't know, Sunday best posture, or it takes forever to really get to know somebody. But once we get past that point a little bit, then things like iron sharpening iron are common tongue. They're not this goal that's too hard to accomplish. They're just a part of life. Couldn't dream of going through it without them. And it's cool to hear these testimonies as part of the service, to put a name and a face that is in the room with that idea.
And I appreciate that, because I think I did just spend 2 weeks as the primary caregiver for my mother as she lived her last days. And I've been trying to compile a list of things that that I learned from that time. And one of the things that is high on that list is just the importance and the value of community. And watching, like, my mother, who was in the process of dying, still loving and caring for those around her, but then watching the people around her care and love for her. And as my mother's body declined, she would often say things like, I just don't know why people are caring for me so much, and I don't understand why people are being so kind. She said those kinds of things often. And I think that caring for others and being part of a community is one of the most Christ-like, glorifying to God things that we can do. And so I think this story, this man cleansed, is a really important example of how to do that for other people.
Can I go to a different quick topic that Mark didn't cover? And I don't know if this would have been on the cutting room floor for him, but we can just make it up as we go. So, Jesus says essentially sternly to the leper, make sure we don't go tell anybody about this. And Mark kind of alluded to the fact, well, if I was told that, I probably would go jump for joy and do all the things and go celebrate. But in that moment, Jesus said not to, and you got to think of why. And Rose, I'll turn to you, because in our worship kind of team reading of this passage, we made observations. And this was an observation that we looked at.
Yeah.
What caught your eye?
Well, I think Caleb also intimated the same observation here earlier when our conversation started. One of the things that we noticed as the worship team read through it is we were looking at location, and we noticed that when Jesus did things or performed miracles, or when he was in the area where the Pharisees, the religious leaders, would have been, that he was encouraging people to stay silent about him. Like, he would, even like when demonic forces would speak and call him the Son of God, he would tell them to be quiet, be silent. Here's another example. He would tell them to be silent. Our observation was those were areas where there would be a lot of Jewish religious leaders. But in the areas where he would be, where there would be more Gentiles, people who weren't already part of this chosen people of the Jews, then he would be more allowing it to be spread. So we were, making suppositions about things like, is it because he's, it is the time for the Gentiles to hear and to know? Or like, was there a reason why he wanted to keep it silent in front of those Jewish leaders? I don't know.
Has that come up in your studies at all?
Oh, yeah, for sure. And even as early as the detailed account, middle of chapter 1, he's teaching in these synagogues. He'll be a part of their proceedings. He'll wait till a scribe hands him the scroll. He unrolls it. He reads it. I'm like, you're Jesus, bro. Why don't you just wave the scribe off and say, I think I got it. He is honoring their proceedings a little bit at the same time he's identifying as God. And so I think he's honoring and respecting the law and saying, you should have the priests validate this. This can be an effective ministry to the priests, to the scribes, to the people that are going to challenge me on my authority comparatively. Then, okay, he goes out in the street and now it's a crowd issue. Now he can't publicly enter a city. And so it's that fascinating dilemma where obviously you look at this, Jesus knew that's what he was going to go do, but
Right.
he still warned him not to do it. And so Jesus is so intentional with his commands on trying to honor that system, even though he knows it's not going to be honored. And obviously Jesus, God works things all together for his good, and we'll see the practical consequences of that action and how the ministry of Jesus pivots into another unique place.
But then I appreciated what you said earlier about the idea that he didn't necessarily want the miraculous things that he could do or his power of nature to distract from the message that he was to fulfill. Like,
is the ultimate goal that he's here to get rid of leprosy? No, that's not the ultimate. He's here for something so much bigger, so much deeper, that plagued that man more than leprosy did, something he was born into that he couldn't get out of himself. And he
certainly healed tons of people. As we're about ready to see,
Right.
the swarms were coming to him after this. So that was part of the fear as well.
Right.
But for whatever reason, Mark goes straight to this specific story instead of all the other dozens of miracles and stories. There's something about the compassion that Jesus showed,
Yes.
and this kind of just emphasis of just the willingness and the faith that the leper was coming to say, Jesus.
And it's going to be an excellent precursor to next week, right? There's no original chapter divisions in the original text. There's one variable and one variable alone in Jesus' deliverance of this guy. Is Jesus willing? That's it. And we know that he is. That is the only variable. The only thing that could possibly get in God's way is if it's not what he wanted to do. And we know Jesus' heart. He is willing to do it. And so I see compassion being the reason Mark goes to this passage. The willingness of Christ being the reason that this interaction might stand out of the others. If you're willing, you can make me clean. This testimony of faith, we're going to see that again at the beginning of chapter 2. And it's just very cool to see the way the narratives tie together. But that tension will continue to be here. Mark's going to not give a lot of detail where we might want it, and then he's going to spend a lot of time on something that we might think is like a duh thing, but really study the scriptures and know, okay, what's the ultimate point? That picture should get more vibrant as we study it, because we're only 1/16 of the way through this thing.
Right.
well, and I really just another real quick aside. Something that caught me was Mark Carey spent a lot of time at the beginning kind of talking about the wilderness and the wilderness in the Old Testament, and like
It's an ongoing theme.
Yeah, that idea. And so it totally escaped my observation. When it says here, in my version says, but he was out in deserted places and they came to him from everywhere. And then Mark Carey on Sunday, just as a side, goes, hey, that's the same word from wilderness earlier. So it just reminds me that we have to read God's word with like, for our infinite God to have chosen to express himself in this little book, that every word is incredibly valuable and should not just be glanced over at a sight. So I just appreciated that little tuck in there from Mark Carey that made me, what that did is that made me want to go back and review what he had said about wilderness at the beginning of the same chapter.
And the most passionate Mark got in the pulpit was when he was saying, man, if the leper is going out there and proclaiming it freely of his healing and his redemption, how much more should all of us be out there in the world proclaiming that we have been freed from sin and death and everything.
And he was told not to.
Oh.
And he did it. We are told to, and we don't.
Right.
Chew on that for a little bit.
Chew on that. And we're told to go do it.
Right.
Yeah.
And then it's
where are we living our lives week by week and being reminded of these truths on any given corporate gathering weekend, and we go live our lives. Are we just forgetting? Are we just blind to it? Are we just just kind of just in the weeds of like, oh, life is, blah, I'm not happy today. But no, we've been redeemed. We're people that Jesus has essentially healed us from our biggest sin need. And that was a challenge. That was definitely a call to be like, are we out there proclaiming it?
It's good.
And there's a lot to unpack in this tiny little story. It's great. I love it. Well, a couple upcoming things. There is a membership class coming up here in a couple weeks. Go to the website so you can let us know that you want to attend and just learn more about what it takes to be a part of our church and our family. And so go to the website, details for that, fbcva.org. And also there's a work day coming up. We'd want you to be a part of that just so we can freshen up the building and get ready for the Easter spring season. You know, all of us, I'm sure, go through our house purging and cleaning and cleansing of indoor and outdoor stuff, and our building needs it too. And it takes an army to pull that off. And we're prepping, obviously, for Easter season. And so, Rose, give us a little teaser on what Good Friday and Easter will be for us here.
As usual, it's really exciting and fun to be a part of. I sometimes I've talked about it on this before. You'd think that we would run out of ideas, or you'd think that we would like repeat something. And I'm sure over the years we've repeated elements, but we're really excited this Good Friday to invite the entire congregation to a read through of the book of Mark. So basically, we as a congregation, we are going to read through the book of Mark, chapter 1 through 16. Now, I promise it's not just going to be talking heads, though. So we've got some really interesting ways that we're going to try to incorporate the body into it. The service will be a little bit longer than some of our services. It takes an hour and 20 minutes to read the book of Mark from beginning to end. So the service we're estimating will be between an hour and 30 and an hour and 45. It won't be quite as highly participatory as it has been before, but we will be handing out the Gospel of Mark English Standard Version to everyone. We did get permission from the publisher of that to do that. And we've created some original artwork to go with that. So think really interesting adult coloring books. The artwork is being completed right now, and it will be on display in the fireside room. It's really cool. So basically think of it as like a collage for each chapter that has so like for chapter 1, there'll be a 1, and then surrounding the 1, there will be everything that takes place in that chapter. And for chapter 2, there'll be everything that takes place in that chapter. That's the original artwork we're having commissioned, you could say, for that. So we've got just some really neat stuff coming up. And then Easter Sunday, of course, will be what it always is, which is a wonderful, beautiful celebration with our choir and our orchestra. 5 services. 5 services, Saturday, and then
Saturday at
Sunday.
5, and then you've got 8 o'clock, 9:30, and 11 o'clock in the main auditorium, and 11 o'clock downstairs for Fellowship 3. The Good Friday service is going to be a little different times. We got 3 o'clock and 7 o'clock, just because we want to give some space there. So don't let that read through of Mark scare you guys. This is the Word of God that's going to be hopefully coming to life. And of anybody, Rose, you've probably done more reading of the Book of Mark than even most, because
I'm about
preparing
to read it
for
again.
this. Yes. So guys, I mean, it's going to be really, I think, impactful as we continue in this series of Mark. Even though it's early in the study of it, I think the more that we can just allow that to soak into our lives and read through it, because it is the gospel. And we want to rehearse that gospel and celebrate it and just remember what Christ has done for us in that Easter season. So, Caleb.
Thanks for having me. Yeah, appreciate it, brother.
In the hot seat. Yeah, bringing up all your thoughts.
The warm seat.
The warm seat. Yep.
Fun stuff.
Rose, thanks for bringing all of your texts and books and thoughts.
Thanks.
And sharing all of your ideas.
I didn't bring, though, I printed the quote about shame and everything, and then I didn't bring the quote
That's
in the
right.
room with
we
me,
can maybe post it.
Yeah, that would be really good.
Hey, no shame, Rose, no shame.
I actually read several quotes. Once I went to look up the book and I started reading, I read several quotes from the book. It sounds like a really, really great book, too.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Yep. Well, thank you guys. And again, look out for that Fellowship Family episode drop this coming Friday, where you can just learn more from the elders. So the fact of the matter, guys, is that sermons are not just meant to take an hour, but rather transform a lifetime. Until next week, much love and God bless.